Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. Joining me on this episode are Suzannah Herbert and Darcy McKinnon, the director and producer of the award-winning documentary Natchez, which will air on PBS on May 11th as part of the Independent Lens series. The film is also currently available for video-on-demand streaming on multiple platforms, including Apple TV, Prime Video, and YouTube TV. Winner of the Best Documentary Feature at the 2025 Tribeca Film Festival, Natchez captures an unsettling clash between history and memory in a small Mississippi town. It's a layered mosaic of people contending with the weight of the past in a place where it's always present. Equal parts amusing and disturbing, we journey through an antebellum tourist destination at a crossroads as it grapples with a deeply troubled history that is so thoroughly ingrained in its present, we're left to wonder if it's actually past at all. Here's the trailer.
Hello. Thank you for coming to Glenfield. My great-grandfather bought this house, bought it in 1865.
No, he didn't.
When did he buy it? Excuse me. 1840?
Mother, 1880. Are you okay?
Natchez is the oldest settlement on the Mississippi River.
Our pilgrims, as we lovingly call them, come from all over the world to see these beautiful homes.
What y'all doing?
We visited.
I ain't got no damn Yankees on here. This gonna be a good tour.
The people that own these homes, they're part of our personalities.
Look at the teeny tiny hoop skirts. Isn't that cute?
I feel like I have stepped back in this lovely way to a lovely world.
We both just have our own ideas, and then we just do whatever we want.
It might be an argument. I don't want to do that.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Natchez is a complicated little town.
God, if you made me a woman, I'm a woman. It's got a very old, rich, deep, peculiar, and I do mean peculiar history.
If it's a fairy tale, that's one thing. But if you then decide it's truth, that's dangerous.
That land literally has our blood in it. Our blood.
Oh, I stretch my hand to me.
People can be so cruel.
They
don't know where his body is.
If I will draw thyself.
If it's a bad thought, don't remind them of it.
Let me finish.
This is what Natchez is right here.
Y'all come back now, you hear?
Suzannah Herbert is a documentary director and editor from Memphis, whose directing work focuses on the American South. She's directed and produced the twice Emmy-nominated film Wrestle. As an editor, she's collaborated on various Bob Dylan, Tony Bennett, and Lady Gaga projects, as well as music videos and award-winning films. Natchez is her second documentary feature. Darcy McKinnon is a documentary filmmaker based in New Orleans, whose work focuses on the American South and the Caribbean. Her work has been seen on the World Channel, POV, and Hulu, and is screened at Sundance, Tribeca, South by Southwest, and more. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please do give it a like or follow. We're available on all podcast streaming platforms, along with YouTube. Now on to my conversation with Suzannah Herbert and Darcy McKinnon. Suzannah Herbert and Darcy McKinnon, welcome to Making Media Now.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Michael. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be speaking to both of you today about your film Natchez, which will play on PBS as part of the Independent Lens series on May 11th. And I will just extend congratulations at the top. I know that your film won Best Documentary Feature at the 2025 Tribeca Film Festival, and it's also done a limited theatrical run. So given the fact that your film, Suzannah, has been out in the world for a fair amount of time, and I'm sure you've had hundreds of conversations about it since then. This will be 101, perhaps.
Exactly.
I'm always curious, you hear this thing sometimes with artists, whether they're writers or they're musicians or filmmakers, where they talk about how, the piece of art is kind of theirs until they release it to the world, and then it becomes the audience's. I'm wondering, since the time that you did your festival run and then your theatrical run, by way of what you're hearing back from audiences, perhaps, what are you learning about the film that you made?
Well, that's a wonderful question. The audience response across the board, from the American South to England to Spain to California to the North, it's it's exceeded all of my expectations in terms of like creative and artistic fulfillment, in terms of what people bring take from it and then give back to me. I think one thing that's been the most incredible is to have people who grew up in Natchez or who grew up in the South, talk to me so beautifully and eloquently, or write reviews about it that just really speak to how the film finally, for them, reflected back to them how their lived experience of growing up in the South or growing up in Natchez, and like how they were never able to articulate it, but that the film kind of lays it all out and shows it to them in a really cinematic, emotional way. So I guess that has been the biggest thing that has really surprised me about the film, and also made me feel so grateful, because that's exactly what I wanted to do, is to get the tone and the feeling of what it feels like to grow up among, these stories and these histories and these sites, and the emotions that it evokes. Yeah, so.
Did you have any particular anxieties or trepidations around how the film would be received by Southern audiences versus those outside of the South?
Yes, 100%.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, that was our main anxiety, I would say, because the last thing we wanted to do was to make a gotcha piece or something that didn't ring true to the vast majority of Southerners. I mean, there are people, I would say, in the white homeowner community in Natchez who do not like the film and think it is a misrepresentation. So I'm not saying it's across the board, but the vast majority of people, especially people outside of Natchez, feel that the film represents the Southern experience to a T.
I also just wanted to say that there's been a really interesting thing. First of all, when we have live in-person Q&As of the film in theaters, they have not lasted less than 45 minutes to an hour. Everybody wants to talk about this film. This is a film that inspires a lot of emotion and conversation and conflicting feelings for some people. But also a thing that's been really nice, I think Suzannah mentioned it, is like people who grew up in Natchez and left. And people who, and even some of the white homeowners and many people in Natchez feel like the film is an affirmation of their experience and a call to do better. So that's been really exciting. I think we were definitely had some fears that we would not be invited back into Natchez again. And there's definitely some people who I maybe didn't expect who are very proud to have been part of the film and feel like it's really important for where Natchez goes next.
Yes, and speaking of where Natchez, let's set the geographical boundaries here. We're talking about Natchez, Mississippi, and Suzannah, give me a sense of where Natchez, Mississippi is located, relative to other well-known spots in Mississippi and the South in general.
Yeah, so Natchez is very much off the beaten path. It's a bit hard to get to. There's not a major interstate near it. There's no airport. There might be an airport coming. a commercial airport coming in the years to come, but that's still in the works. And it's at the end of the Natchez Trace, which is this 400-mile scenic highway that is a National Park Service kind of site, or run by the National Park Service. And it's this ancient trading path that Native Americans used to go from Natchez, Mississippi, to Nashville. So anyway, so you can go down the Natchez Trace, this beautiful scenic highway, and see the countryside. And anyways, it's 3.5 hours north of New Orleans. It's 5 hours south of Memphis, which is both where we are from respectively. It's an hour 45 minutes from Jackson, Mississippi. It's on the Mississippi River. It's the highest point on the Mississippi River. It sits 300 feet above the river, so it has these incredible views of the sunset every night over the Mississippi, and it's very protected from the power of the Mississippi River. And all around it is low-lying land, and it's where plantation owners would have all their plantations and enslave people. And then Natchez was actually the city, kind of like the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard, or like where people would vacation and also set up shop and like kind of have their families in the town and really show off their wealth and entertain and do business and banking. And so it has this collection of antebellum estates or mansions, really. They were like the enslavers' townhouses.
So essentially where they got to enjoy the fruits of someone else's labor.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how did you yourself discover Natchez?
Well, so when I first started thinking about this film, I was invited to a wedding on a plantation, and it really got me thinking about how we today use sites of such pain and trauma for our own enjoyment and profit and entertainment. And I really wanted to understand that, but also interrogate it. So I started doing a lot of research, and I went to a lot of plantations. I went on lots of tours, and my research was also just like talking to our friends in Mississippi, and they all told me to go to Natchez. And so I had never been before, even though it's only 5 hours south of Memphis. But when I got there, I was just really struck by the beauty of Natchez, but also this like underlining pain that was right beneath the surface, and that conflict was very unsettling. And
in this wedding that you attended, had you been aware that the location was a former plantation?
Yes, actually, I actually didn't attend the wedding.
Okay. Okay.
But the mere fact that it was on this plantation where hundreds of people were enslaved, I personally was like, I cannot, drink and dance,
Yeah.
and be there, and the fact that there's this dissonance between the entertainment of a party at such a site of such pain and trauma, not just in our culture, in white dominant culture. I think it's very normalized, right? And so I wanted to make a piece of work that kind of opened up people's minds before they got to that point, but also kind of tried to understand why we as Americans, why we as Americans, have these mythologies that people cling so fervently to.
Darcy, as a producer on the film, at what point did you become aware of kind of this jumping off point that Suzannah was just sharing with us around her exploration of the history and the sociology at work at Natchez? At what point did you hear about this and say, there's a documentary there, or, let me bring my thoughts and experience to the making of this film?
Suze and I met pretty early on in the process. And in fact, there was an earlier iteration of the film that was going to be set on a plantation in Louisiana during wedding season. That didn't work out, but that is actually how we connected, because she was going to be here near New Orleans working on a project. And that's when we met. I fell kind of deeply in love with her film Wrestle and recognized that there was a cinematic lens that she was bringing to the table and a way of working that I was really interested in. I'm interested in making films with small footprints that travel across the American South and tell complicated stories of place and community. And that's exactly what was being proposed, even in the earliest iteration of the film. I'm also a former public school teacher in New Orleans public schools, and I used to teach the history of this era to seventh graders. Um, and so I have a lot of opinions on how, and I have been in the position of performing and presenting history to people before. And so it was all of those things kind of connected. I produced a film called The Neutral Ground a few years ago. That was also a Tribeca that deals with the removal of Confederate monuments in New Orleans and how that kind of connects to the historical revision of history in the American South. So this felt like a topical extension, but I was really excited with the visual and cinematic language and approach that Suzannah was bringing to the project. And we met, got on like a house on fire. This is our first collaboration, but it won't be our last.
Suzannah, I had heard or read someplace that before you even shot your first 1 minute of film, you actually spent upwards of 6 weeks in Natchez. Talk to me
Yeah.
about how important that was and what the objective of dedicating that time in the location was.
It was really important to not just this film, but also to Wrestle, my first film, was time. And to get to know people without the barrier of the camera. I think that there is like a power dynamic that gets introduced immediately when the camera comes along, and one that isn't equal, right, between director and participant. And I really wanted people to get to know me, but also I wanted to understand where they were coming from on a human level before we started filming and like before the pressures of the filmmaking came into the scene. No pun intended, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I, yeah, and also like people in Natchez in particular, they are used to people coming and going all the time. That's the industry, is tourism, right? But I wanted to get to know people on a deeper level. And so I felt like I needed to do that with, just being around, going on tons of tours, going to parties, going to brunches, and really getting a lay of the land, because it's not, there's not it's complicated, right?
Sure.
It's not one thing. There's so many different opinions and versions of history that are being told in Natchez, and I kind of wanted to understand it all before I brought in the camera. And then it was really important, once we did start filming, to be there for 6 weeks straight. So we were filming during our first shoot was in October of 2022, and we did 10 days. But then once we were able to raise more of our production money, and actually ITVS PBS came on as a as a very early believer in the film and the vision. And it was because of them we were able to, film for extended amounts of time. And so in the spring of 2023, we filmed for 6 weeks straight. And I think being around during spring pilgrimage at all times, like really, we became immersed in the community in a way that if we had gone for a weekend at a time, it just people wouldn't trust us.
Yeah, and in this pre-production period of time, I'm assuming as you're integrating yourself in these various social circles, you must be doing some kind of mental casting and
Yes.
making sure I want to talk to that person, I want to get that, I want to be able to capture this type of an exchange. What was your goal as you were doing that in terms of, you spoke earlier where you were adamant not to make a gotcha film.
I had like so many notes and spreadsheets about like who I talked to and who I should talk to. And like Kathleen Bond, who's the head of the National Park Service, she was really helpful in like giving me context behind like the different groups and the different clubs and who runs this club and who does this. And, oh, you should talk to this person and that person. And, I had just like pages and pages of notes and phone numbers. And there's one thing about Natchez that like if I had sat down and written emails, people would not respond. You
Sure.
have to be in place
Yeah.
and you have to be like, I'm here, let's get together. Can you get coffee? Can I take you to coffee? Can I come take your tour? Or just show up at their house and take their tour, right? And then that leads to a coffee. And so I had this like web of people that I had to kind of get to know and understand. And immediately when I met Tracy, who receives in the blue antebellum dress, I met her at a cocktail party, and she was just so open and loving and interesting. And I was like, "Oh, you receive?" And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have my hoop skirt. You want to see it?" And I was like, "Sure." And so I went over to her house and she climbed up that ladder and went in the attic and threw it down. And like I wasn't capturing that on film in the moment, but I was like, wow, like I immediately knew like this woman is special and this is cinematic. And so then when we came back months later, I was like, Tracy, can you get your dress out again? It was back up in the attic and she's like, sure, yeah, let's do it.
You used a word that I think listeners might want some definition on. You said receive.
Oh
Talk
yeah.
about that role, please.
Yes, so in Natchez, there are all of these antebellum homes, private homes, that open up their doors for public tour twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. And they have what they have anointed pilgrimage, where people from all over the world come to take these tours of private homes. And the people who greet you, not always, but they'll dress up in antebellum attire and they'll receive, is what they say, receive the pilgrims. So they're welcoming you into a theatrical kind of fantasy experience.
Just because also Susanna brought up Tracy, I think, the film is explicitly about kind of the history of the way we tell the story of slavery, and that ties into race. But I think there are so many levels and layers in Natchez, and Tracy's a great example because I think it also has a lot to do with gender. The people who are receiving are typically women. They're in these hoop skirts. These hoop skirts represent a kind of femininity that feels aspirational for a lot of the people who choose to do that reception. And the nature of pilgrimage is hospitality. So there's already a veneer of politeness and kind of old-fashioned politeness that comes in, and you're walking into people's private homes, being invited in with this idea of old-fashioned hospitality. It already sets up, it's very challenging to push back on the story that's being told in that context.
Right.
So when you walk into somebody's house it's very much protected, I think, by the steel of the hoop skirts, protects a kind of femininity. And what we see in Tracy's character through the film is how she's navigating and negotiating that as a modern Southern woman as well.
Yeah, there's actually two Tracys in your film. There's a man named Tracy, and there's Tracy McCarthy, the woman that we've been speaking of. And their experiences of Natchez, at least in the beginning, are very, very different. So tell us, if you would, Susanna, about Tracy Collins.
Yeah, so Tracy Collins, he goes by Rev, and he is a preacher and also a historian who does tours on a daily basis out of his van named Precious. And he says that he tells the real Mississippi history, and he really does take his clients on a journey. The tour is like an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on if he likes you or not. And he really, yeah, he tells a very comprehensive history of Natchez, that there's so much that's not even in our film that he talks about. He starts from, the Native Americans who were in Natchez and all along the Mississippi Delta, and goes up through the civil rights movement, really. And so Rev is, yeah, he's incredible. And when I met him at the visitor center, he recruited me onto his van, and I went on his tour, and I was just like blown away by his tour. And it was in the editing process, I would say, with Pablo Parenza, our amazing editor, that we realized that Rev's the history that he was telling and his narrative was actually what we would structure the film around.
Interesting. In your ride-alongs with Tracy on his tours, and given the fact that he is he's preaching as he's providing his tours, that's for sure. It's a wonderful hybrid of his vocations.
Yeah.
Were there instances where you were sensing tension or unease around the story that he was telling on the part of the tourists that he was bringing around?
Yeah, I think we took the tour over 20 times. So we did spend a lot of time with Rev and with various tourists. And, the tension was really, it was more, I think Rev does such a brilliant job of making people feel really comfortable. And he starts out the tour with a lot of humor and makes people feel at ease.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, 45 minutes to an hour into the tour, he really starts to talk about the more difficult, painful parts of our history and then how that relates to our current day, right? And I think that people can be uncomfortable, but I think that I think most people feel they trust Rev, and then they're more open and willing to have a conversation and to listen and to talk about it. And you'll see in the film the conversations that stem out of, the history that Rev tells some people, that they've never heard some of this history.
Sure.
And so I think people have a lot of questions, and Rev meets them with such grace and understanding that, it is really fruitful and transformative in a lot of ways. And I think Rev says also in the film that, like, he can read body language, and he's taken the a wide array of opinions and humanity on his tour, and he basically says in the film, like, he knows when to shut up.
Yeah.
And so he can really read a room, I think, really well. But he also pushes people in ways that I think that they're grateful for.
There's another fascinating character in the film, a man named David Garner. And I found him particularly fascinating because he seemed to embody sort of multiple influences and almost sets of emotion. And maybe if we can talk about how you discovered him and decided on his inclusion in the film, it can prompt one thought that I had.
David has the house Choctaw Hall, and he gives tours on a daily basis, but is also a part of pilgrimage, right? And so I was introduced to him through Tracy. She actually received there, and we started filming, and we started taking his tour. We took his tour over 15 times. And he's really involved in the community in Natchez, in the pilgrimage and in the tourism industry.
And he has what feels like a very theatrical, understandably rehearsed, presentation. It felt as we moved through the film where he was getting more comfortable with a certain type of revisionist history. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I think that he knows, like Rev, he knows his audience, right?
Sure.
So some tours would not be explicitly racist, and then other tours would be.
Yeah.
And we saw that happening throughout the filming, throughout the year and a half that we were filming with him.
So he's kind of reading the room?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the rant, the culmination, I don't want to give too much away, but the
Sure.
culmination of his beliefs and his truth was really, really intense. But we also wanted to show in the film him both publicly and privately, being racist.
Yeah. I know that you both are pressed for time, but I wanted to ask this question of each of you, given you're both filmmakers from the South, and if you feel a particular type of responsibility being someone who is telling, you're not representative of an area, but sometimes when someone says, I'm going to tell the stories of the Northeast or the South of or the West, you've got two paths that you can go down. You can either burnish the fantasy, or you can be the bummer at the table who's telling the truth.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from each of you how you receive that definition and how you balance it.
Well, one thing with this film is it is really difficult in a lot of ways and hard, but the topics and that we wanted to dive into. So it was important to us to also make it entertaining and funny, and that is our experience also of being in Natchez. There is so much charm and levity, and Rev, brings that to his tour as well. And so that was important to us, for sure. And also entering into, we wanted this film not to be like the history, right? It's more about how we history and how we understand our past. And a lot of people consume history through tours and through going to places, but also through pop culture and through art and through film and TV. So we wanted to enter into that in an entertaining, also accessible way.
And Darcy, any thoughts on that topic?
Kathleen says that in the film, Natchez is a complicated little town, and I think the South is a complicated region. And I think as Southerners, Suzannah and I are interested in that complication.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we want to burnish a mythology, and we also don't want to burn it all down. We want the place that we love and care about to engage with its own history and to be accountable so that we can make a better South. Like, I intend to live in the South for the rest of my life, and I have lived in the South for my whole life. I love it here, and I love it in spite of, and sometimes because of, its complications. And so I think for us, it's not as simple as, we'll see a lot on social media. Oh, I'll never go there. I'll never give the South $1 of my money. Well, that's based on a perception of a place that's not complicated and in depth.
Sure.
The largest population of Black people in America is in the American South. And so the fact that our systems and our states and our cities are complicated and have not fully reckoned with history is an ongoing project that we have to take on. And I think that's what we hope this film lives in the tradition of people who love a place and in so loving it are invested in holding it accountable.
And one just final shout out. I just want to give credit to your cinematographer, Noah Collier, who, it's a beautiful film. There's often a dreamlike quality to a lot of the shots that were taken. And so I think that's worth acknowledging, and as an enticement to get folks to check out this film that appeals to the head and to the heart, to tell as you both have said, a complicated but necessary story. Suzannah Herbert is the director. Darcy McKinnon is the producer. The film is Natchez. It'll be on PBS as part of the independent film series on Monday, the 11th of May. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Headed back down south, gonna see my daddy's mistress, gonna buy back her forgiveness, pay off every witness. One more time down south, sell the family headstones, drag a bag of dry bones, make good all my back loans. So if I come to your door, let me sleep on your floor. I'll give you all I have and a little more. Sleep late down south, look up my former mentors, live off Yankee winters, be a landlord and a renter, create myself down south, impress all the women, pretend I'm Samuel Clemens, wear seersucker and white linens. So if I come to your door,